Dickerson, New York, appeared with her attorney Stephen Johnson in Clinton County Court before the Honorable Kevin K. Ryan. Mitchell, after consulting with her attorney, waived her right to have the charges presented to a grand jury and consented to proceed by a Superior Court information. The Superior Court information charged Mitchell with promoting prison contraband in the first degree, a Class D felony, and criminal facilitation in the fourth degree, a Class A misdemeanor. The promoting prison contraband first degree charge alleged that Mitchell intentionally, knowingly, and unlawfully introduced dangerous contraband into Clinton Correctional Facility on or about May 1st, 2015 by providing dangerous contraband consisting of hacksaw blades, chisels, a punch tool, and a screwdriver to Richard Matt, an inmate being held at Clinton Correctional Facility at the time. The criminal facilitation in the fourth degree charge alleged that Mitchell intentionally, knowingly, and unlawfully introduced contraband tools and hardware to inmates Matt and Sweat, believing that it was probable that she was rendering aid and providing means for Matt and Sweat to commit the felony of escape in the first degree, and in fact, Matt and Sweat did commit escape in the first degree. These are the same two charges that Joyce Mitchell was originally charged with back on June 12, 2015, when she was arraigned in Plattsburgh City Court. Upon the advice of her attorney, Stephen Johnson, the defendant pled guilty today to each charge contained within the Superior Court information. After several weeks of ongoing investigations conducted by the Inspector General's Office, members of the New York State Police Violent Crimes Unit and the Forensic Investigation Unit, as well as the Clinton County District Attorney's Office, and after an extensive consultation with each of these agencies, I determined that although there were possible other charges in which to charge Ms. Mitchell with, that the people were confident that the two charges within the Superior Court information were charges that would be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and in the interest of justice, I negotiated a plea and recommended sentence that was placed on the record today. Ms. Mitchell and her attorney agreed that the defendant would plead guilty to the two-count Superior Court information and waive those charges being presented to the grand jury. Specifically, any other charges that we could file against her would be promoting prison contraband, conspiracy to commit murder of her husband Lyle Mitchell, and sexual-related charges under Article 130 of the penal law relative to David Sweat and Richard Matt. The negotiated sentence, as you heard in court today, was for the defendant to be sentenced to the maximum indeterminate sentence allowable by law. That on the promoting prison contraband, she would be sentenced to a 2 1/3 to 7-year term of imprisonment with a $5,000 fine upon her conviction for promoting prison contraband, and a 1-year county jail sentence to be imposed concurrently with a $1,000 fine on her conviction for criminal facilitation. In addition to these prison sentences and fines, the court will impose mandatory surcharges, prime victims' fees, and require the defendant to provide a DNA sample and pay the $50 DNA databank fee. A further condition of the negotiated plea and sentence is for Joyce Mitchell to cooperate with the ongoing investigation of the Inspector General's Office relative to their continuing investigation at Clinton Correctional Facility, as well as a consent to surrendering her New York State Teacher's Assistant Certificate, which was issued on September 1st, 2002. The court, as is normal procedure, has adjourned this matter to September 28, 2015 at 10 a.m., approximately 2 months out, for the Probation Department to conduct a pre-sentence investigation report. And this is standard procedure pursuant to Criminal Procedure Law, Articles 390. The purpose of this report is to provide the court with additional background information on Ms. Mitchell. The Clinton County District Attorney's Office did not consult with or discuss the terms directly with Ms. Mitchell. I have only discussed terms of the negotiations with her attorney, Mr. Johnson. Furthermore, my office did not consult or discuss the terms and conditions of this plea bargain with Lyle Mitchell or his attorney. In regards to the charges pending against Gene Palmer, our office is continuing its investigation with the New York State Police. The charges against Palmer being presented to the grand jury were delayed to allow Palmer's attorney to review the case and all the statements that Palmer made previously to New York State Police. Plea negotiations with Palmer's attorney have failed to reach an agreement, and Palmer's attorney has advised us in writing that Palmer will not waive its right to grand jury and that the case will be presented in early August to a Clinton County grand jury. In regards to charges pending against David Sweat, of escape in the first degree. A delay in the grand jury presentment was caused by the Inspector General's investigation, as well as the investigation being conducted by the Franklin County District Attorney's Office. The only significance of the delay was just identifying witnesses who can testify relative to the escape without jeopardizing the other investigations. These witnesses have now been identified, and we will also present this case in early August. At this time, there are no other individuals who have been identified through the investigation as being involved directly or indirectly with the June 6, 2015 escape of inmates Richard Matt and David Sweat from Clinton Correctional Facility. Lastly, I have been in regular contact with the Inspector General's office relative to her investigation of Clinton Correctional Facility, and at this time I have no comments relative to that investigation.
Andrew,
So let me just start off. Go ahead, Ron.
a plea deal usually implies a kind of a deal, and she
Right.
agreed to plead guilty to both counts, give up her teacher's license, pay the fine.
Right.
What does she get besides you not filing other charges?
That's exactly what she gets, is not filing any type of sexual assault, rape charges that could possibly be charged against her relative to these allegations of sexual conduct between her and David Sweat or her and Richard Matt. Obviously, in order for us to pursue those charges, we need additional evidence to support those charges other than her statements. And I made a determination that it was in the interest of justice to just proceed with these two charges that we have and not go forward with anything else.
Is it possible she'll face less than the 7 years? Is there also part of the deal that she might do the minimum? Or?
Right. That sentencing is what the court would impose is the 2 1/3 to 7-year sentence, depending on how she is inside the facility. When she comes up for parole and they review her potential release times, that would be just subject to division of parole.
She's getting the max.
She's getting the max on these charges, yes.
Mr. Wiley, you said that the goal of this deal was for her to cooperate with the continuing investigation. You've also said that she has been cooperative speaking to investigators from the beginning. So what questions do you still have for her? How can she still be helpful to the investigation?
I don't have any additional questions for her. There may be questions by the Inspector General's office. They have representatives that have spoken with Mr. Johnson, and they are making arrangements to interview her to assist in their investigation at the facility.
Is there information on any topic specifically that you feel that she hasn't yet shared?
That's a question that you would have to ask the Inspector General's office with.
If the evidence is so overwhelming, why bypass the grand jury process?
That's the exact reason why to bypass. As far as the defense is concerned, I would think Mr. Johnson may want to clarify that question, but because the evidence was so overwhelming, Ms. Mitchell has acknowledged her guilt, obviously, by appearing in court today and entering a plea. She, once again, speak to Mr. Johnson or Ms. Mitchell about it, but she wanted to expedite her case proceedings and move on with the matter, so that's why we went by Superior Court information today.
Did David Sweat confirm that there was a sexual relationship between him and Joyce?
Negative.
And
Negative.
he did not.
He did not confirm that whatsoever.
Did you say in court that she also agreed to plead guilty if further charges do come, or did I? She agreed to plead guilty to the 2 charges contained within Superior Court information, and we can distribute that to everybody for your email addresses that I have. We'll distribute that out, as well as a copy of the plea offer. But we agreed to not pursue these charges. Potentially there could be, based on the Inspector General's investigation, there could be allegations of other actions that Joyce Mitchell took or participated in during her employment at Clinton Correctional Facility. And if something along those natures arise during that investigation, my office would be advised on it, then we could pursue additional charges against Ms. Mitchell, and those would not be covered under the plea that was entered today. Why not wait? Why not wait
Go ahead.
The felony count specifically was the incident on or about May 1st, in which she put the hacksaw material in the frozen hamburger meat with Gene Palmer.
That's correct. There's a second incident in which she talked about providing hacksaw blades to Richard Matt. We just made a determination to expedite this matter, to not
have additional charges to satisfy that charge as well.
And just so you know,
Hold on, folks.
on the prosecution of David Sweat, given that it would not increase his amount of incarceration, it
Right.
will increase the costs in New York State, can you just walk us through the rationale for pursuing charges against David Sweat?
Are you suggesting that I should not charge David Sweat with escape from the Clinton Correctional Facility?
Just asking, given that there's no additional time to spend in prison, what
You're right.
punishment would realistically happen?
There are issues there that we've discussed over the last month and a half or so, or 2 months involving this case, relative to charges being filed against David Sweat. And those are in particular that, and not that I would think anything of this nature would happen, but he's presently obviously serving a life without parole sentence. I cannot hit him any harder than he's been hit with a life without parole sentence. Down the road in the future, maybe something occurs with his appellate aspects of that conviction. Not that we're anticipating that at all, but the bottom line really is that to proceed with this investigation, to indict Mr. Sweat with the escape in the first degree will allow the Department of Corrections to enhance the services that they can provide Mr. Sweat. In other words, special housing units, 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. With this conviction, that will enhance their ability to sustain that type of penalty or sentence upon Mr. Sweat. And so that's the primary purpose. I'm not anticipating that that will be a long, drawn-out proceeding, but I haven't had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Sweat directly.
Mr. Martin?
Yes, sir.
What's the deal that Gene Palmer rejected?
I don't really want to get into that, but we discussed the charges that he's already been charged with, proceeding by Superior Court information, similar to what we did this morning, and have him enter a plea to those charges, and then an appropriate sentence that myself, the attorney for Palmer, and the court would accept. So.
Why not wait
Are
until
you
the...
going to follow the conspiracy to commit murder charges then, or that's acceptable?
We feel that relative to that charge, the conspiracy to commit murder, we have evidence to support the charge. Whether that evidence would be supported beyond a reasonable doubt at trial is an issue. We're alleviating the prosecution of that charge, based on a number of issues, including statements by Joyce Mitchell, statements by David Sweat, and the evidence that the New York State Police were able to resolve during execution of search warrants in their 2-month investigation to this date.
Andrew, what other comments was David Sweat able to, or what other statements did David Sweat make that could further corroborate some of the things that Joyce mentioned? As you all know, based on the information that's come out during the investigation and reports of statements that Sweat has made, his contact with Joyce Mitchell was obviously extremely limited from the fall of 2014 through June of 2015 when the escape occurred. So he was unable to corroborate a number of the statements that Joyce Mitchell made relative to her interaction with Richard Matt, because it was Matt and Mitchell's collaboration, if you want to call it, to the actual escape. He did provide information. I think the question may be better answered by Major Guess relative to those statements, because I've been hesitant to discuss David Sweat's statements in detail because his case is still obviously pending grand jury presentment. So.
Why not?
Said no one else was directly or indirectly
Right.
implied in the escape. But what about the 12 people at Dannemora who've been suspended? Does that
Right.
implicate them somehow?
It does not implicate them in any way. Joyce Mitchell has not implicated them in any way that I am aware of, and David Sweat has not implicated them in any way. We can only take for purposes of our investigation, face value of what David Sweat has told members of the New York State Police, and he has not, to use the expression, he has not thrown any correction officer at the facility at all. under the bus. And the timing of David Sweat's apprehension and the release of the 3 supervisors and the 9 correction officers, although the timing would appear to be relevant to David Sweat being apprehended and statements he was making, it's my understanding that there's no correlation, direct correlation to that, other than those were individuals that the Inspector General and the Department of Corrections made a determination to release.
Just to clarify, you don't anticipate charges of anybody else involved in the prisoners?
Correct.
Mr. Wiley, can you just tell us how you feel today, like after wrapping this up without a trial? Is life easier, or where do you go from there?
I mean, life's not easier. This is my job. This is what I was elected to do. I serve the people of Clinton County and the state of New York, and whether she pled out today or not, we would proceed with the prosecution of the matter. Am I glad that one aspect of this matter is over with? Definitely. But we were ready to proceed with whatever charges we had to with grand jury and trial if necessary. Nothing?
Why not wait until the IG's report comes back?
Sorry?
Why not wait until the IG's report comes back to pursue these charges?
Because I'm being updated from the IG's office as to the relevancy of my case that occurred here in Clinton County that I'm involved with, and I feel confident that based on the representations by the IG's office that what we did today relative to Joyce Mitchell is in the interest of justice. And as far as any other charges that may come out of the IG's report, that will be for another day to deal with.
Mr. Wiley, there's already been some surprise generated that you would decide not to pursue the conspiracy to murder charge. Was
Right.
it just not a strong case?
As I indicated in earlier, I cannot convict Joyce Mitchell just on her statements alone. All right, and because of the facts that we had before us to prove such a charge beyond a reasonable doubt, it would have been extremely difficult. Would I have been able to go forward, present a case to grand jury, return an indictment against her on that? Yes, it's very possible that we could have done that based on the evidence that we have. But to be able to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, I have an ethical obligation to my job, to the people here in Clinton County and New York, to act as ethically as possible as we can in a case of this nature, and that includes making a determination on what charges we can prove and what charges we can't prove. And if I believe we've had difficulty proving a case, then there's no reason to go forward with that indictment.
Has not corroborated that part of the plot?
Correct. Anyone else?
Can you tell us anything about the type of facility that she's likely to spend her time?
I don't. I mean, I'm familiar with several of the facilities in the state that house women, but as far as which one it would be, she's not charged with a violent felony, although she led to obviously having 2 violent felons escape from the prison. That will be subject to the Department of Corrections.
If someone did matter Sweat had killed someone during their time on the phone, would we be standing here today, or would we
I don't think we'd be standing here today with a plea. Not at all. That would have enhanced our outlook on how we would have dealt with Joyce Mitchell. Correct.
Mr. Wiley.
Any other questions?
Mr. Wiley.
Yes,
Ms.
ma'am.
Mitchell's actions ultimately sparked a multi-million-dollar manhunt that affected the state of mind and peace of mind of everyone around here. Are you at all concerned about the reactions of the people of Clinton County that served at all with
Right.
this plea agreement?
On how Joyce Mitchell's involvement
On
affected?
settling on the plea agreement.
Well, I feel that we resolve this matter in the best light as possible, not only for the people, but for the people here of Clinton County and the state. I feel that, yes, there is a large financial obligation that the state has incurred as a result of the escape, and she was directly, was a direct contributor to that. I guess I could have asked the court to impose a restitution figure on Ms. Mitchell today,
whatever the monetary amount is that hasn't even been determined yet by the state. But I didn't feel that was appropriate part of the plea disposition in the interest of justice. So if people don't like the way I handle this case, they can vote differently on 2017.
You said you haven't spoken to David Sweat yet, do you?
I have not.
Do you intend to? Are you planning on interviewing him?
If the opportunity arises where I feel it's necessary to do so, based on our case, our investigation, potentially, I'm not. I don't have anything to give David Sweat, and so if he voluntarily spoke with the New York State Police, he's very open in speaking. So if that opportunity arises, I may cross that bridge when it comes.
And is he being helpful with the IG?
To my knowledge, he hasn't had any discussions with the IGs. They may have had a representative present during his interviews, but I'm not aware of what their involvement with him is.
Can
All right.
Mr. Johnson step to the microphone just to answer a couple questions?
Well, I'm all done. If there's no other questions, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You've been listening to District Attorney Andrew Wiley recapping the events today. Joyce Mitchell pleaded guilty, taking a plea deal, admitting to helping in the escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat. She will serve 7 years in prison and a $6,000 fine.
That's right. She also will have to help the Inspector General with the investigation that is ongoing at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora. This is a binding deal. She cannot retract her plea. She also has to give DNA. She did this on the advice of her attorney, who said that she should do it because it was best for her. Her attorney, Stephen Johnston, is now speaking. Let's listen to what he has to say.
There you go.
Can you tell us why your client pleaded guilty to the charges?
Well, first of all, there was overwhelming evidence that she did what she admitted to today in court. She's cooperated for many, many hours with the police, and she told them the same things that she told the court today, among other things. Number one. Number two, I was fearful of some additional charges, so it seemed like the best thing to do. Well, she was a little bit, but she was a lot better today than she has been in the past in terms of her emotions. A lot better today.
What's she been like when you've been meeting with her?
I'm sorry?
What's she been like when you've been meeting with her?
Sobbing, alternating between that. She's been very anxious, very depressed, very remorseful for what she did, and that's how she's been feeling.
You spoke to Lyle Mitchell after the
I did.
meeting. How is he doing, really?
I mean, he's upset. I mean, there's no question about it. But he's clearly been sticking with behind his wife. Does not believe the allegations of a conspiracy for murder, and he's been behind her all the way through, as far as I know.
Was he supportive of the plea deal?
He felt it was in her best interest to accept it, as I understand it.
Do you believe that Joyce is sorry for what she's done?
There's no question she is. No question. She got in over her head into something that she never should have started, but she did, and she's paying the price now. But she realizes that she made a horrible mistake.
Did she say anything about why she did it?
She has. I think that she had certain ideas I think that to a certain extent, Matt got her to feeling good about herself, better than she had for a period of time, and she was swept off her feet a bit for a period. And then when she realized who she was dealing with, everything changed.
How did she learn about Matt's death, and what was her reaction?
I don't know how she learned about Matt's death, whether I told her or whether she heard it from some other source. I really can't recall that right now. But she was just glad that he had been apprehended and before he had any chance to hurt anyone else. I know that. But I don't recall who she heard it from.
Did you deliver the news of Sweat's capture?
I did, but I don't remember if she had already heard it from somebody at the facility she was, where she was incarcerated. I don't recall that.
How much time do you think she'll...
Same thing as with Matt.
How much time do you think she'll actually serve?
Well, she's entitled to get what's called good behavior time off her top, off the top amount, which would bring it down by a third. And there's a thing called merit allowance time, which could enable her to meet the parole board a bit earlier. She's entitled to that. So it's it's really hard for me to say. That will be determined by people connected with or in the facility. But anyway, you know, she'll do the minimum, might meet the parole board a few months earlier, the minimum of 2 1/3, and presumably not more than 4 2/3.
Does pleading guilty sort of count as cooperating and being on good behavior, or is it not?
Nah, not that I know of. I mean, I guess acceptance does to a certain extent, but I'm not really familiar with the guidelines and the parameters in the facility. I don't really handle those types of things.
So we heard Mr. Wiley today saying that it would have been extremely difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Joyce Mitchell, you know, was in this murder conspiracy charge.
I don't believe she was involved in any murder conspiracy charge. I haven't believed that from the outset. I think that the thing I was concerned about was each time she brought something into that facility, that's a separate count, a separate 2 1/3 to 7. And that's the thing I was primarily concerned about. But I'm not saying Mr. Wiley couldn't have proven a case. Well, all I'm saying is I don't personally believe it, and that was my concern.
So a big part of the deal for her was not getting those additional contraband charges?
Yes, yes.
How many additional times did she bring things?
I'm not clear, but even if it's just once, that's all it takes, right? Okay, thank you.